Have you ever returned from an ostensibly wonderful, revitalizing 3-week family holiday, sun-kissed and unwound, only to discover an entirely unfamiliar family having brunch in your kitchen, making free with your carefully cultivated, artisanal sourdough starter as if it were a communal buffet? Likely not. It's the sort of situation that resembles a delirious fantasy or perhaps a poorly conceived television comedy. For me, however, it was the startling truth that struck us with the force of an unexpected breaker the instant we drove into our driveway. This narrative is truly memorable, a tale of homeowners' association overstep so excessive it verged on the unbelievable. I imagine I may have unintentionally set a new world record for the briefest interval of post-holiday tranquility before being thrust headlong into what I can only term high-stakes suburban conflict. Our holiday had been idyllic. 3 weeks spent traversing national parks with my partner and our 2 children. Picture roaring campfires, breathtaking scenery, and the unique, profound quietude that only nature can offer. We had diligently organized it for more than 12 months. Our residence, a pleasant 2-story house in a supposedly serene, well-kept neighborhood, was left under the supervision of, well, no one in particular. We had lights on timers, requested a neighbor to collect the mail, the standard safety measures. Our HOA, governed by the formidable Karen, and yes, her actual name was Karen, a detail that seemed almost too fitting, was usually more preoccupied with the exact hue of beige for your mailbox or the mandated height of your lawn. Irksome certainly, but scarcely felonious. At least, that was my presumption. The initial indication that our return to everyday existence would be far from ordinary was the strange car positioned directly in our drive, a cherry red convertible, gaudy and showy, utterly incongruous. My partner gave me a bewildered glance. "Did you forget a friend was borrowing the house?" they inquired. If only. A preliminary surge of tension caused my blood pressure to rise. We parked on the thoroughfare, a sense of disquiet growing in my gut. As we neared our front entrance, we could perceive music blaring, cheerful pop tunes that were certainly not part of any of our music collections. Then, through the translucent drapes of our dining room window, we observed them, a family of 4, total strangers, chuckling as they circulated a dish containing what strongly resembled my private reserve of fancy biscuits. I am quite certain my jaw actually sagged in astonishment. I recall groping for my keys, my hand trembling slightly, a concoction of incredulity and indignation surging within me. I flung the door open, probably with more force than I had intended. The music ground to a stop as 4 sets of eyes turned towards us, their expressions transforming from leisurely pleasure to startled bewilderment. Can we assist you?" The man, in his mid-40s, paunchy, clad in a Hawaiian shirt that had evidently experienced better times, inquired. He had a trace of chocolate at the edge of his mouth. "Assist me?" I stammered. "You are in my residence. Who on earth are you?" The woman, presumably his spouse, clutched a half-consumed cookie to her bosom. "We rented it," she stated, her voice somewhat unsteady. "For the week, via the local manager, a very obliging lady, Karen." Karen? My thoughts spun. Our Karen, the HOA president Karen, the one who had previously issued us a violation notice because our garden gnome was, and I quote, exhibiting undue whimsy? It seemed impossible, yet the couple appeared genuinely perplexed. The man produced his phone and displayed an email chain. It was concise, rather unprofessional, but it outlined a week-long rental contract for our address, including a price that made my eyes widen. It appeared our home had been advertised as a luxury suburban retreat, and the contact, the individual who had apparently met them, provided them keys, my spare set from where, and received a substantial cash deposit, was Karen. The signature on the roughly typed rental agreement merely stated property management services, but the email address was one I vaguely recalled from some of the more assertive HOA communications. My partner was already contacting the police while I attempted to grasp the sheer effrontery. Our haven, our dwelling, had been converted into an unauthorized Airbnb by the very individual charged with maintaining community standards. The temporary occupants, let's refer to them as the Hendersons, were as much casualties as we were, though unwitting ones. They had paid a significant sum in cash directly to Karen. They were unaware that the property manager was an imposter and that the rightful owners were about to arrive. The police showed up, 2 youthful officers who seemed as if they would prefer to be elsewhere. Initially, they were disposed to consider it a civil issue, a disagreement between landlord and tenant, until we emphatically clarified that we were the owners and had never sanctioned any rental. Upon seeing our identification, the accumulating mail addressed to us, and the genuine astonishment on our faces, they began to regard it more seriously. The Hendersons, to their credit, looked ashamed and promptly started to collect their possessions, apologizing profusely. They had been deceived, pure and simple. But the true focus of my rapidly consolidating anger was Karen. How could she? And more critically, what else was she capable of? As an architect, I am accustomed to handling intricate regulations and, at times, challenging individuals. This, however, was an entirely new degree of derangement. This wasn't merely a breach of bylaws, this was a transgression against our home, our privacy, our tranquility. And I was already beginning to devise a strategy. Karen had no inkling of whom she had just antagonized. She assumed she was tricking some naive homeowners. She failed to realize she had just agitated a hornet's nest with AP.eng designation and a propensity for the meticulous, systematic resolution of problems. This was not merely about reclaiming our house. This was about ensuring Karen comprehended the complete repercussions of her conduct. The immediate aftermath involved a flurry of changing locks, inspecting for damage, mercifully minimal though they had made a considerable impact on our food supplies, and attempting to soothe our baffled children. The Hendersons, once they grasped the severity of the circumstances and that Karen had essentially defrauded them, were surprisingly helpful. They furnished copies of their emails with Karen, a physical description of her, and a thorough account of how she had granted them entry, even noting she had used a key from a lockbox concealed beneath a particular potted plant on our porch. A spare I had forgotten was even there. A classic elementary error on my part, but sheer criminal opportunism on hers. That evening, we lodged in a hotel, unable to bear the idea of sleeping in our own beds, aware that strangers had occupied them under such peculiar conditions. My mind, nonetheless, was anything but peaceful. It was racing, assembling the components of the puzzle, the absolute, unadulterated nerve of Karen's plot. She must have observed us loading the car, known we were departing for a lengthy duration, and resolved to convert our home into her personal source of income. The audacity was astounding. The subsequent morning, I was a man with a purpose. My architectural education stresses precision, evidence, and comprehending systems. I resolved to tackle this like one of my more intricate projects: identify the issue, collect all pertinent information, scrutinize vulnerabilities, and then implement a perfect solution. The primary task was acquiring solid proof. We possessed security cameras, a fairly typical arrangement covering the front entrance and driveway. I had been intending to upgrade to a more extensive system, and this event cemented that decision. I fetched the SD cards, my heart thumping with a mix of apprehension and eagerness. And there it was, as clear as could be, Karen, unmistakable in her customary attire of a brightly colored, somewhat too tight power suit and her trademark oversized sunglasses, confidently approaching our walkway. The footage displayed her manipulating the spare key lockbox, admitting the Hendersons, and even giving them a brief tour of our porch, indicating things as if she were the proprietor. The timestamp corresponded exactly with the Hendersons' arrival. This was the conclusive evidence of her direct participation in the unauthorized entry and unlawful rental. I preserved multiple copies, transferred them to secure cloud storage, and experienced a grim feeling of contentment. This was no longer just an allegation, it was a documented reality. My subsequent action was to ascertain the complete extent of Karen's activities. Was this an isolated incident, or was she managing some sort of secret neighborhood rental conglomerate? I conversed with a few dependable neighbors. Old Mrs. Henderson from across the street, a kind elderly woman who dedicated most of her days to her award-winning roses, remarked on seeing Karen near our house more frequently than usual while we were absent. I assumed she was just being exceptionally thorough, dear, she had commented, but she did appear awfully pleased with herself. Another neighbor, Mark, a fellow professional who had experienced his own disagreements with Karen concerning his fence's height, was less astonished. That woman, he had grumbled, shaking his head. She operates this HOA like it's her private domain. I wouldn't be surprised by anything she does, particularly if money is involved. His remarks struck a chord. Karen's demeanor had consistently been one of supreme self-importance. Her vehicle, a recent model luxury SUV, seemed somewhat extravagant for someone in a volunteer HOA president's, unpaid position. From where was her income originating? This train of thought steered me towards a rather compelling notion. As a component of my long-range investment plan, I, through a very privately managed LLC, owned multiple rental properties distributed across different areas, including a few within our own neighborhood. It was a secondary pursuit, something I found enjoyable, overseeing assets and guaranteeing high-quality accommodation for tenants. I had consistently kept it distinct from my personal affairs. Most individuals, my neighbors included, were unaware of this facet of my financial holdings. An idea, audacious and unlikely, started to take shape. What if Karen, or members of her board, were residing as tenants in one of my properties? The irony would be almost too flawless. I am not typically inclined towards dramatic coincidences, but the cosmos occasionally has a peculiar way of preparing the circumstances. I made a mental reminder as soon as I returned to my office I would retrieve the records for my LLC's assets in our postal code. The prospect of Karen unknowingly remitting rent to the very individual whose home she had just audaciously transformed into an illicit hotel elicited the first genuine smile on my face since this entire episode commenced. It was improbable, but if it materialized, well, that would alter the whole approach to my response. My fury was gradually transforming into a cold, distinct resolve. Karen had initiated a confrontation with the incorrect homeowner. She was about to discover that I didn't merely design structures, I could also dismantle her small empire, fraudulent brick by fraudulent brick. The inquiry was merely commencing, and I sensed that the foundations of Karen's authority were about to face some severe issues with their structural integrity. The first thing on Monday morning, I contacted my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, who managed all my LLC's real estate dealings. I recounted the entire sordid affair, the holiday, the unlawful tenants, Karen's prominent role in the security footage, the Hendersons' testimony. Sarah listened with patience, her intermittent MHMS interspersed with the soft tapping of her keyboard. "All right," she stated when I had concluded. "Trespassing, fraud, unjust enrichment. We have quite a selection of charges here. The footage is invaluable. We'll compose a cease and desist for her property management services that will make her ears burn, and then we'll discuss damages." But before she could proceed, I cut in. "Sarah, there's another matter. A bit of a long shot, but I need you to examine the tenant rosters for all properties owned by Willow Creek Holdings LLC in the 90210 zip code, well, our actual zip code. You understand. Specifically, I'm searching for a Karen Miller and perhaps a few of her known associates on the HOA board, like a Tom Wilson or a Brenda Jenkins." Sarah paused. "You suspect she's one of your tenants?" she inquired, a hint of curiosity in her voice. "It's a gut feeling," I answered. "But if it's accurate, it adds a rather amusing dimension to this entire situation." I dedicated the following hour at my desk to reviewing my LLC's portfolio myself, while Sarah conducted her own cross-verification. My heart pounded against my ribs. It seemed almost too perfect, too much like a pro-revenge cliché to occur in reality. And then I located it, Karen Miller, tenant at 128 Elia Lane, 3 streets away from my own. The lease was active, signed 18 months prior, for a pleasant 3-bedroom ranch-style house that Willow Creek Holdings had obtained as part of a larger acquisition. My breath caught. Not only Karen, but a swift cross-check of the HOA board members list, conveniently accessible on the community website, against my tenant database showed that Tom Wilson, the HOA treasurer and Karen's most ardent supporter, was renting 45 Rosewood Court, and Brenda Jenkins, the secretary infamous for her overly detailed minutes and Karen's most loyal defender, resided at 210 Oakview Drive. All 3 of them were my tenants. Unbeknownst to them, their landlord was the very individual Karen had just so egregiously wronged. A slow, predatory smile spread across my face. This wasn't merely a long shot, it was a certainty. The universe hadn't just prepared the circumstances, it had provided me with the entire screenplay, a director's chair, and a megaphone. The forthcoming HOA monthly meeting was set for Wednesday evening. Ideal. I informed Sarah of the development, and I could almost perceive her smile over the phone. Well, she remarked. "This certainly complicates matters for her in the most delightful fashion. So, what's the strategy, maestro?" The strategy was straightforward yet ruinous. We would permit Karen to walk directly into the snare. I would attend the HOA meeting not as an aggrieved party, but as a homeowner with a significant complaint. I would present my proof concerning the unlawful rental of my home. I would observe her fabricate, deflect, and try to steamroll her way through it, as was her method. And then, when she was at her most conceited, her most disdainful, I would reveal my decisive move. Or rather, Sarah, whom I had requested to join me as my legal representative, would. The subsequent 2 days were devoted to thorough preparation. I assembled a file, large printouts from the security footage, copies of the Hendersons' emails and their sworn statement, which Sarah assisted them in preparing. They were keen to see Karen face repercussions for deceiving them as well. A comprehensive estimate of incurred expenses, new locks, hotel accommodation, professional cleaning to eradicate the persistent smell of inexpensive air freshener, and betrayal was included. I also had Sarah compose carefully phrased letters to Ms. Miller, Mr. Wilson, and Ms. Jenkins. These were not eviction notices, not immediately. They were far more nuanced, formal announcements of forthcoming property inspections by the landlord, entirely lawful under their lease agreements with a 24-hour notice. Referencing routine maintenance evaluations and ensuring compliance with community standards as detailed in their lease. The timing was deliberate. These would be hand-delivered by a courier the day following the HOA meeting. Let them perspire a bit first. The elegance of it was that Karen, in her role as HOA president, had frequently advocated for stricter adherence to property maintenance and regulations. Rules that were mirrored in the tenancy agreements for properties within the HOA's jurisdiction, including those owned by my LLC. She had, in effect, established the very standards that could now be employed against her. The irony was so palpable you could spread it on a sandwich. I envisioned Karen in her pricey yet invariably unstylish pantsuit, her expression a mask of patronizing superiority, entirely oblivious that the ground beneath her Gucci knockoff heels was on the verge of collapsing. The HOA meeting could not arrive soon enough. This was no longer solely about retribution, it was about re-establishing order, about proving that the misuse of authority, regardless of the pettiness of the domain, carries consequences. Wednesday evening materialized, enveloped in the oppressive humidity of late summer. The community clubhouse, the venue for HOA meetings, was alive with the typical assembly of dissatisfied residents, a handful of indifferent observers, and Karen's central faction of supporters on the board. Karen herself was in excellent spirits, officiating from the head of a lengthy folding table like a monarch presiding over her court. She was attired in a particularly flamboyant leopard print blouse, her lips pursed in that recognizable expression of forced patience, as if engaging with us ordinary individuals was a significant imposition. My partner and I selected seats in the front row, Sarah next to me, serene and collected, her attaché case resting on her lap. Karen's gaze passed over me, a brief, almost undetectable tightening around her mouth before she proceeded, commencing the meeting agenda with her customary brisk, self-assured tone. We endured monotonous discussions concerning budget assignments for pet refuse stations and the never-ending argument over holiday decoration schedules. My pulse maintained a steady, controlled beat. Patience. At last, Karen declared new business. Any new business? This was my moment. I rose. Yes, Karen. I have some new business. A ripple of conversation passed through the small gathering. I seldom contributed at these meetings. Karen's smile failed to convey warmth to her eyes. Ah, Mr. Johnson. And what urgent issue do you present to the board today? Her voice was imbued with that distinct form of condescension she reserved for anyone who presumed to challenge her dominance. It relates to the rather peculiar, and I must assert, highly unlawful rental of my private home while my family and I were on holiday for the preceding 3 weeks, I declared, my voice distinct and unwavering, resonating slightly in the abruptly hushed room. Karen blinked. A hint of something, surprise, irritation, crossed her features, but she rapidly regained her composure. Rental, Mr. Johnson? I am certain there is some confusion. The HOA does not interfere in private rental arrangements unless, naturally, they breach community covenants, which I trust yours did not. She offered a constrained, smug little smile as if she had already outwitted me. Oh, there is no confusion, Karen, I retorted, my stare resolute. And it most assuredly contravened several laws, not to mention every conceivable community covenant of propriety and trust. I then proceeded to recount the entire saga, calmly and systematically. I detailed discovering the Hendersons in our residence. I mentioned their assertion that they had rented it from a local property manager named Karen. Upon the mention of her name in this setting, Karen scoffed. This is preposterous. Are you implicating me in something, Mr. Johnson? I am the president of this homeowners association. I enforce the rules, I do not violate them. Her voice escalated in indignation. Her supporters, Tom Wilson and Brenda Jenkins, nodded emphatically, murmuring about defamation and baseless claims. Excellent. She was behaving precisely as I had foreseen. Implicating? Not yet, Karen. Merely presenting facts, I stated, then gestured to Sarah. My legal counsel, Ms. Profer Davies, has some information she would like to present. Sarah arose, unlatched her briefcase, and took out a compact projector and a laptop. In moments, the bare wall behind the board table was lit up. Sarah commenced, her voice composed and businesslike. What you are about to witness is security footage from Mr. Johnson's property, timestamped during the interval he and his family were absent. The room was utterly still as the recording played, Karen, clearly recognizable, admitting the Hendersons into my house, Karen, waving farewell to them from my porch. Audible surprise spread through the attendees. Karen's face had turned an alarming whitish hue. Her leopard spots suddenly appeared less like a power statement and more like a sign of illness. This footage it's manipulated, she stammered, her voice faltering. It's a deep fake. This is a malicious assault. Tom Wilson interjected, yes, anyone could fabricate that. Sarah carried on smoothly, unperturbed. We also possess sworn affidavits from Mr. and Mrs. Henderson holding up a bundle of documents detailing their dealings with you, Karen, including descriptions of cash payments made directly to you for the rental of Mr. Johnson's home. We have copies of the emails you exchanged with them from an address frequently utilized for HOA business, albeit under the pretense of property management services. The color completely vanished from Tom's and Brenda's faces as well now. They glanced at Karen, then at me, then back at Karen, a dawning realization of horror in their eyes. The other board members were shifting uneasily. The tension in the room had become palpable. Karen opened her mouth, then shut it again, for once seemingly at a loss for words. The police have been notified and are extremely interested in this evidence of fraud, trespassing, and unlawful enrichment, I interjected, my voice soft but carrying the authority of irrefutable truth. The room buzzed with whispers. People were gazing at Karen with unconcealed disbelief and revulsion. Her reign was collapsing before her very eyes. But I was not done. Not by any means. Sarah cleared her throat and silence descended once more. And Ms. Miller, Sarah stated, her eyes fixed on Karen, there's one additional, rather relevant detail concerning your fitness to manage anything, let alone an HOA. It appears that in your eagerness to act as a landlord with other people's property, you've been somewhat neglectful of your own responsibilities, specifically to your actual landlord. Karen stared, uncomprehending. My landlord? What are you discussing? She faltered, her composure entirely gone. She resembled a trapped creature. This was the critical juncture. I stepped forward again. What Ms. Davies is alluding to, Karen, I said, my voice filled with a calm decisiveness I hadn't realized I possessed until that instant, is that the delightful 3-bedroom rancher you currently occupy at 128 Elia Lane. It is owned by my company, Willow Creek Holdings LLC. Which signifies, Karen, that while you were preoccupied with unlawfully renting out my family home, you were, in reality, a tenant of mine. A collective inhalation of breath swept through the room. One could have discerned a pin falling onto the industrial-grade carpet. Karen's jaw literally slackened, her eyes, wide and disbelieving, darted between me and Sarah and back again. The leopard print seemed to droop on her. And Mr. Wilson, I went on, addressing the pale-faced treasurer, your home at 45, Rosewood Court, also Willow Creek Holdings. Ms. Jenkins, I added, my gaze moving to the now quivering secretary, 210, Oakview Drive, the same situation. The silence in the room was absolute. The three of them appeared as if they had encountered a specter. Their small hierarchy, their comfortable setup, had just been publicly and dramatically destroyed. Karen, the HOA despot, the self-styled monarch of the neighborhood, was not only revealed as a common swindler but was also, along with her principal associates, a tenant of the very man she had so arrogantly mistreated. The expression of complete ruin on her face was more gratifying than I could have ever conceived. The suburban conflict had just arrived at its climax, and Karen was in a state of utter, disorganized withdrawal. The direct consequences of that HOA meeting were, to state it mildly, devastating for Karen and her associates. The instant the phrase, you were, in reality, a tenant of mine, escaped my lips, the entire atmosphere in that clubhouse transformed. The previously subdued whispers burst into open demands for Karen's resignation. Individuals who had once been intimidated by her reign of meticulous terror rediscovered their voices. Fraud, someone exclaimed from the rear. She utilized HOA resources, another called out, indicating the email proof Sarah had mentioned. Karen appeared utterly defeated, her expression a combination of disbelief and dawning horror. Tom Wilson was perspiring heavily, his collar suddenly seeming far too constricting, while Brenda Jenkins looked as if she were about to cry, murmuring, I knew it. I knew this would happen. My lawyer, Sarah, calmly proposed that perhaps Ms. Miller, Mr. Wilson, and Ms. Jenkins might wish to submit their resignations from the board, effective immediately, to prevent further issues. Karen, bless her deluded soul, made one final, pitiful attempt at defiance. This is a fabrication. You cannot prove anything. I will sue you for slander, she shrieked, her voice breaking. Sarah merely lifted an eyebrow. Ms. Miller, we possess video proof, sworn statements, pending inquiries into financial transactions, and now the rather inconvenient circumstance of your tenancy. I would recommend you consult with your own legal representative before making additional statements. As for your position on the board, I believe the community has expressed its views quite unequivocally. Indeed, several larger, angrier homeowners were beginning to move towards the board table, their faces stern. The two remaining board members, who were not my tenants and had always seemed more like hesitant adherents than true believers in Karen's authority, swiftly disassociated themselves, advocating for an immediate vote of no confidence. It was approved without opposition, with even Karen's allies too shocked and fearful to resist. Within 15 minutes of my disclosure, Karen was no longer HOA president. Tom and Brenda relinquished their positions in disgrace soon after. The rain had ended. The following morning, as undertaken, a highly professional courier delivered the formal notifications of impending property inspections to Karen, Tom, and Brenda. I can only surmise their apprehension upon receiving those official-looking documents. The police, now equipped with my thorough evidence compilation, had initiated a formal inquiry into Karen's fraudulent rental operation. Detectives spoke with me, my spouse, and the Hendersons, who were exceptionally cooperative, keen to see justice served. The mechanisms of genuine justice, as distinct from HOA justice, were gradually but inexorably starting to operate. For Karen, matters deteriorated significantly. The eviction notices were not long in coming. My LLC, Willow Creek Holdings, possessed entirely lawful reasons. For Karen, it was a simple non-renewal at the end of her lease term. Her lease was conveniently expiring in 60 days regardless. For Tom Wilson, we identified several documented breaches of his lease agreement concerning unapproved modifications to the property, a shoddily built deck he had erected without authorization, which Karen, as HOA president, had conveniently disregarded. Brenda Jenkins had a record of tardy rent payments, meticulously recorded by my property manager. These were not retaliatory evictions in the legal interpretation. These were contractual enforcements that I now possessed a very compelling personal and professional incentive to pursue with diligence. They had, through their own conduct and their involvement with Karen's illicit activities, proven themselves to be undesirable tenants. The delightful irony was that Karen had frequently used the HOA covenants and regulations as a tool to browbeat residents. Now, the very principle of adhering to rules and contractual duties was being employed to unravel her existence in the neighborhood. She resisted, naturally. There were tearful calls to my LLC's property management office, which, of course, directed them to Sarah. Ambiguous threats, even a cringe-worthy attempt at an apology delivered to my residence via a wilted bunch of supermarket flowers, which I politely refused. She endeavored to garner support, but her reputation was ruined. No one wished to be linked with her. The eviction procedures advanced lawfully and systematically. It required a couple of months, given the nature of the law, but ultimately Karen Miller, Tom Wilson, and Brenda Jenkins were all legally obliged to leave the properties owned by my LLC. Observing the moving vans depart from their respective homes was a moment of quiet, intense contentment. The flashy red convertible the Hendersons had used was long gone, but Karen's own late-model luxury SUV, now likely a considerable financial strain without her unlawful earnings, seemed to droop slightly as it exited the neighborhood for the final time. And then arrived the genuinely satisfying segment of my pro-revenge. Removing all of them was the initial phase. The second phase was leasing out their residences as well. Once the properties were empty, I did not merely leave them unoccupied. I had them professionally cleaned, implemented a few stylish enhancements, fresh paint, contemporary light fittings, the sort of improvements Karen would have penalized someone else for undertaking without submitting forms in triplicate. Then, Willow Creek Holdings LLC, under my discreet guidance, advertised them for rent, this time with legitimate, professional property management. We vetted prospective tenants meticulously, giving preference to responsible families and individuals who would make a positive contribution to the community. Within a month, all three houses had new occupants. I made it a personal, yet discreet, endeavor to observe from a distance the new families settling in, a young couple with an infant into Karen's former dwelling, a cordial doctor and his spouse into Tom's, a tranquil retired librarian into Brenda's. The sight of fresh, joyful life inhabiting those spaces, supplanting the negativity and sense of privilege that had previously existed there, was the ultimate triumph. I hadn't merely removed an issue, I had actively enhanced the neighborhood, one rental property at a time. The houses themselves appeared to respire more freely, liberated from the burdensome atmosphere of their former occupants. And yes, the rental revenue was a pleasant perk, a concrete affirmation that occasionally benefiting the community and prospering financially can coincide, particularly when your adversaries practically provide you with the means to their own undoing. The aftermath in our small suburban community was akin to a refreshing breeze following an oppressive spell of heat. With Karen and her principal supporters gone, a feeling of normalcy and, dare I suggest, relief permeated the neighborhood. An emergency election for the HOA board was conducted and a group of sensible, community-focused individuals came forward. I was even asked to consider running, a proposition I courteously but resolutely declined. My architect's mind had experienced quite sufficient HOA politics for one lifetime, thank you very much, though I did volunteer to advise, free of charge, on amending some of the more outdated and severe bylaws Karen had established. The neighborhood gatherings transformed from quasi-judicial proceedings into genuine community dialogues. The stifling dread of getting a violation notice for a slightly too colorful petunia disappeared. People began to interact more. A spirit of fellowship emerged that had been suppressed under Karen's rule. As for Karen, her ruin was swift and total. The police inquiry resulted in charges of fraud and theft by false pretenses. Confronted with the overwhelming proof, including the incriminating security footage and the Hendersons' steadfast testimony, she eventually admitted guilt to lesser charges to evade a more severe punishment. She incurred a substantial fine, probation, and a court directive for compensation to the Hendersons and to my family for the expenses we bore. The last I heard, she had relocated to another state, purportedly residing in a much smaller, less opulent apartment. Her period of dominance over a suburban domain was definitively finished. Her luxury SUV was repossessed, a suitable conclusion, I mused, for someone whose avarice and self-importance were limitless. Tom and Brenda receded into anonymity, compelled to seek new rental housing, hopefully absorbing a crucial lesson about aligning oneself with a declining, deceitful figure. My family and I recuperated. Naturally, we enhanced our home security system. Fort Knox has nothing on us now. The children still occasionally jest about the period when the other family occupied our house. Yet the incident, as unsettling as it was, imparted a significant lesson. Never discount the effrontery of entitled individuals, but also never discount your own ability to retaliate when provoked excessively. My specialized expertise as an architect, with a grasp of procedure and organization combined with my private real estate ventures, furnished the ideal resources for this specific type of pro-revenge. It was as though my entire professional life and investment approach had been culminating in this one peculiar showdown. The most gratifying retribution was not merely Karen's downfall, but the beneficial change within the community. Observing new, content families inhabit the homes formerly occupied by Karen and her associates, knowing those properties were now managed ethically and competently by my own company, served as a daily affirmation of our success. It transpired that those houses possessed excellent rental prospects when managed with rectitude. Our neighborhood is a superior place now, calmer, more amicable. And sometimes, late in the evening, when I am examining architectural drawings or LLC financial statements, I permit myself a small, contented smile. Karen believed she was engaged in a game of chess, oblivious to the fact that her opponent was a grandmaster who also owned the board, the pieces, and the venue itself. Sometimes, strategic and lawful deconstruction is necessary to create something better.